she was just a black woman in a simple green dress, holding a sick child's hand, looking for a glass of water. That was all she had done. But Victoria Aldren, draped in champagne and diamonds, surrounded by 500 people who had paid $10,000 just to be in the same room as her, looked at Amara like she was something that had wandered in from the wrong world. And in front of everyone, with a smile still perfectly in place, she said it. "Go back to where people like you stay." Laughter, murmurs. Someone raised a phone. Amara didn't cry. She raised her chin. She turned, and she walked away with the kind of dignity that no amount of money had ever been able to buy Victoria Aldren. What Victoria didn't see, what no one in that glittering ballroom saw, was the man standing 12 feet away who had watched every single second of it. Kim Jae-Ho, Korean Mafia boss. A man whose silence was more dangerous than any threat ever spoken aloud. A man with a dragon tattooed up his neck, and 900 million reasons why no one in that city told him what to do. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply turned to his assistant and said 4 words. "Get me her name." What happened next? What he did without making a single phone call himself, without ever raising his voice, without Victoria Aldren ever understanding who had dismantled her world or why. That is a story about what real power looks like when it decides to move. Before starting the story, comment here from where you were watching and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The chandeliers of the Aldren Institute Gala cast their light like a judgment, cold, precise, and without mercy for those who did not belong. The marble floors reflected the movement of 500 guests who had paid $10,000 each simply to be in the same room as one another, to breathe the same gilded air, to confirm, in silence, that the world was still divided exactly as it had always been. Amara had not paid to be there. She never would have. She had come because Minjun had a fever, and Minjun wanted water. And the door she opened led somewhere she was never supposed to be seen. She stood at the edge of the grand ballroom in her simple olive dress, her natural hair pinned in a careful bun, her small brown leather bag pressed against her side. A woman whose entire presence said, "I am not here to trouble anyone." The thin gold chain around her neck, the one that had belonged to her grandmother, caught the light for just a moment. That was all it took. Victoria Aldren noticed her the way a hawk notices something that has wandered into the wrong field. "Who let the help in here?" The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Victoria had spent 52 years learning that the most devastating things are said at conversational volume, with a smile still intact. Amara showed her badge. She said the name Yoon clearly and calmly. She explained, in a voice that did not waver, that she was there for a child, only for a child, and that she would be gone in a moment. Victoria looked at her the way people look at furniture that has been placed in the wrong room. "Darling," she said, and the word landed like a door closing. "I don't care who brought you. You don't belong in this hall. Go back to where people like you stay." There was laughter. Not loud. Laughter at these events is never loud. But it was there, spreading through the nearest cluster of guests like a small and quiet fire. Someone raised a phone. Amara did not cry. She had decided, somewhere in her 20s, that she would not give rooms like this the satisfaction of her tears. She raised her chin. She turned. She walked back toward the service staircase with the kind of dignity that cannot be bought or inherited, only earned, slowly, through years of being underestimated. What she did not see as she walked away was the man who had entered the ballroom 12 seconds before. Jae-Ho had arrived through the main entrance, flanked by two men who moved like shadows trained to be invisible. He wore a black suit that had been cut specifically for the shape of his silence. His shirt was open at the collar, not from carelessness, but because he had stopped hiding the dragon that climbed his neck years ago. His watch caught no light. He preferred it that way. He had stopped walking the moment he saw the scene unfold. For 40 seconds, his assistant would later count them because the stillness was unusual enough to track. Jae-Ho stood without moving. His eyes followed Amara until she disappeared through the service door. Then they moved, slowly, to Victoria Aldren. She was already laughing at something else, already moving on, already certain that the moment was over. It was not over. Jae-Ho turned to his assistant and spoke at a volume no one else could hear. "Get me her full name. The woman in champagne." His assistant did not ask why. In 6 years of working for Jae-Ho, he had learned that questions delay things that are already decided. Jae-Ho straightened his cuff. He accepted a glass of water from a passing server. Not wine, never at events like this, and moved into the room as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that Victoria Aldren, in all her inherited confidence, had not yet learned to recognize. She had been seen doing it, and the wrong person had been watching. Upstairs, the room was quiet in the way that only a sleeping child can make a room quiet. Completely, without effort, without asking anything of anyone. Minjun lay on his side, his small chest rising and falling, one hand open on the pillow beside his face. He had fallen back asleep before Amara had even reached the top of the staircase. Children that age trusted sleep the way adults had forgotten how to. Completely, without negotiation. Amara sat in the chair beside the bed and did not move for a long time. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. From the outside, she looked composed, the way she always looked, the way she had trained herself to look in rooms and corridors and service elevators where composure was the only armor she was permitted to carry. But inside, something was trembling. Not breaking. She had decided long ago it would not break. But trembling, the way a wall trembles when something heavy moves past it on the other side. People like you. She had heard variations of those words before. She would, she knew, hear them again. That was perhaps the worst part. Not the words themselves, but the certainty that they would come again, dressed differently, smiling differently, but carrying the same meaning. That she was tolerated, that she was useful, that she was, fundamentally, background. Minjun stirred. His small eyes opened halfway. "Amy," he whispered. "I'm here," she said. Her voice was soft and steady. It was always soft and steady for him. "You look sad again." "I'm okay, baby." "You always say that." He blinked slowly, already drifting back. "You make a face when you're not okay. I know your face." She said nothing. She reached out and smoothed the blanket over his shoulder, and he was asleep again before her hand had even left the fabric. She was still sitting there, still folded into that careful stillness, when she heard 2 quiet knocks at the door. Jae-Ho did not wait to be invited in. He never did, not in his own spaces, and this hotel, like most things around him, had long since become his space. He stepped inside, glanced at his son the way men like him glance at the one thing they cannot afford to lose, and then looked at Amara. He looked at her the way he looked at contracts before signing them. Completely. Without performance. "Tell me what happened downstairs." It was not a question. Amara recognized the difference. It was nothing, Mr. Kim. It's already Amara. He said her name the way you say a word you have been careful with for a long time. Precisely, with full weight. She stopped. I was there, he said. I saw. The room held its breath. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. There was no point in softening it. He had already seen it with his own eyes. And Kim Jae-Ho, she had come to understand in 6 months, was not a man who asked questions he didn't already know the answer to. She told me to go back to where people like me stay, Amara said. Quietly, without drama. The way you state a fact that has already done its damage. Jae-Ho did not react visibly. That, she had learned, was the most dangerous version of him. You are part of my house, he said. The words were simple, almost domestic. My house has a standard. What happens to people inside my house reflects on that standard. Amara opened her mouth. To say it was fine. To say she didn't need anything. To perform the grace that exhausted women perform for people who hold power over their lives. He spoke before she could. You don't need to protect her from consequences, he said. That's not your job. He looked once more at Minjun. Then he turned and walked out of the room, pulling the door closed behind him with the careful click of a man who understands the weight of silence. Amara stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then she looked down at her grandmother's chain, still catching the light, and for the first time all evening, she let herself breathe. Downstairs, Kim Jae-Ho was already crossing the ballroom floor, moving in the direction of Charles Aldren, who stood near the bar with the wide smile of a man expecting to close the best deal of his political career. He had no idea the conversation was already over. Charles Aldren had a handshake that he had practiced, not consciously, not anymore, but it had been refined over 30 years of rooms exactly like this one, until it had become something automatic and precise. Firm enough to signal confidence, warm enough to signal approachability. The handshake of a man who needed you to believe, in the space of 3 seconds, that he was both powerful and safe. He extended it now as Jae-Ho approached. Jae-Ho took it, shook once, released. I need to cancel our agreement, Jae-Ho said. The smile on Charles Aldren's face did not disappear immediately. It took a moment, the way a light takes a moment after the power has already been cut. A slow dimming, almost confused, as though the face had not yet received the message that something had ended. Pardon me? Charles laughed, the way men laugh when they are certain they have misheard something. Jae-Ho, we've been building this for 8 months. The contracts are ready to sign tomorrow morning. The investors are already... I know what the timeline was. Charles caught the tense. His laugh faded completely. Then what is this about? His voice dropped. The public warmth evaporated, and what remained underneath was the colder, harder thing that old money always kept in reserve. If there's a number that needs adjusting, we can discuss. It isn't about a number. Jae-Ho turned his glass slowly in his hand. He did not look around the room. He did not need to. He already knew exactly where Victoria was standing, exactly who was within earshot, exactly how much space he had for this conversation. Your wife humiliated a member of my household tonight, he said, publicly, in front of witnesses. He paused for precisely 1 second. I don't enter agreements with families whose judgment I cannot trust. Charles stared at him. The word families had landed with particular weight, and both men understood why. In the world Jae-Ho operated in, family was not a sentimental word. It was a structural one. It described who you protected, who you answered for, and who you could not afford to have questioned. Jae-Ho. Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice to the register of men negotiating damage control. Whatever Victoria said, she can be thoughtless sometimes. You know how these events are. People drink, they say things. She was not drinking, Jae-Ho said. She was precise. Charles had no answer for that, because it was true, and he knew it was true. And he knew that Jae-Ho knew it was true. And there was nothing left in that chain of knowing except the silence at the end of it. Victoria appeared at her husband's side, sensing, with the animal instinct of someone who had spent decades managing social crises, that something had shifted in the room's gravity. She arrived with her smile already prepared, the specific smile she used for situations that required both warmth and authority simultaneously. "Kim Jae-Ho," she said, extending her hand. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to speak tonight. Charles tells me the partnership is going to be absolutely—" Jae-Ho looked at her hand, then at her face. He did not take her hand. The smile held for 2 more seconds, and then, for the first time in a very long evening, Victoria Aldren did not know what to do with her face. Jae-Ho turned back to Charles. "My legal team will send the formal withdrawal in the morning." He straightened his cuff, the same quiet, final gesture he had made upstairs. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." He walked away from them without hurry, without looking back. Around them, no one had heard the exact words, but everyone had seen. In rooms like this, that was more than enough. Heads turned. Conversations paused for half a second. The particular silence of 500 people noticing something and choosing not to say so descended over that corner of the ballroom like a weather change. Victoria turned to her husband. "What just happened?" she whispered. Charles was still staring at the space where Jae-Ho had been standing. "I don't know," he said, and for the first time in 30 years of practiced confidence, he meant it completely. What neither of them understood, what they would spend the following weeks trying to reconstruct, asking the wrong questions of the wrong people, was that the conversation in the ballroom had been the least significant thing Jae-Ho had done that evening. The significant things were already in motion, and they made no sound at all. The first call was made at 11:47 that night. Not from Jae-Ho directly. Men like him did not make calls like that themselves. But from a number that certain people in certain cities recognized immediately, the way you recognize a knock at the door that arrives too late at night to mean anything good. The man who received it listened for 40 seconds, said nothing except understood, and ended the call. By morning, it had begun. Not with noise, not with confrontation, not with anything that could be traced back to a single decision made in a marble ballroom over a glass of water. It began the way the most permanent kinds of damage always begin. Quietly, at the edges, in the places where no one thinks to look until it is far too late to look anywhere else. The first of the Aldren family's 4 primary Asian partners sent a brief message to Charles's office the following Tuesday. Regretfully reconsidering. Market conditions. Nothing personal. The second followed on Thursday, citing restructuring. The third did not send a message at all, simply stopped returning calls, which in that world was its own kind of answer. Charles spent those days on the phone, pulling at threads, calling contacts he had spent decades cultivating. Everyone was warm. Everyone was sorry. No one could explain exactly what had shifted, or when, or why every door seemed to be taking slightly longer to open than it had the week before. He did not yet connect it to the Gala. He would not connect it to the Gala for another 2 weeks, and by then, it would not matter. The information about his campaign finances arrived at the oversight office on a Wednesday morning. Anonymous. Documented with the kind of precision that suggested whoever had assembled it had taken no pleasure in rushing. Every figure was sourced. Every irregularity was cross-referenced. It was, the investigator who received it would later tell a colleague, the cleanest submission he had seen in 20 years. Whoever had put it together had not been angry. They had simply been thorough. Victoria's name was removed from the guest list of the Harrington Foundation Gala without explanation. Then from the advisory board of a children's hospital she had chaired for 11 years. Then, quietly, from the invitation list of 3 private events she had attended every year for the past decade without ever once questioning whether she was welcome. She began making calls. She began asking questions. The answers she received were polite, vague, impenetrable. She would never know exactly what had happened. She would spend years constructing theories, a rival family, a business enemy, a misunderstanding that had spiraled. She would never arrive at the correct answer, because the correct answer was a woman in an olive dress and a thin gold chain who had walked away from her without saying a single word in response. Amara knew none of this. She was sitting at her kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, her anatomy textbook open beside a cup of tea that had gone cold, when the message arrived from the Yoon family's administrative office. She read it twice, then a third time. Her tuition. Covered. Fully. No conditions, no contract, no performance required. She sat with it for a long time, the way you sit with something that doesn't quite fit the shape of the world as you have understood it. She thought about her mother, about the night shifts, about every room she had walked into and immediately calculated how quickly she could make herself small enough to belong in it. She typed her reply to the office. Short. Sufficient. Please thank him. In the morning, she arrived at the Yoon residence at her usual time, let herself in with her key, and found Minjun already awake and sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for her with the uncomplicated certainty of a child who has never once doubted that the people he loves will show up. She made his breakfast. She listened to him talk about a dream he'd had about a blue horse. She laughed, genuinely, the way she rarely permitted herself to laugh in professional spaces, when he insisted the horse had spoken to him in English with a Japanese accent. Jae-Ho was at the table when she turned around. She had not heard him come in. She was not sure she ever did. He was reading something. He did not look up immediately. The dragon on his neck was still. His coffee was untouched. Then, without raising his eyes from the page, he said it. Low and even, the way he said everything that mattered. Never again. 2 words, no context offered, no explanation extended. Amara looked at him for a moment, at the stillness of him, at the man who had said nothing publicly, done nothing visibly, and had nonetheless moved the entire weight of his world to make sure that what had happened to her in that ballroom would not happen again. Not in his house, not in his name, not to someone who had given his son the grace of being truly known. She did not ask what he meant. She did not thank him in the elaborate way the moment might have invited. She simply turned back to the stove and said quietly, in the same voice she used to settle Minjun back to sleep on difficult nights, I know. And the kitchen held its warmth around the 3 of them. The child talking about his blue horse, the woman who had learned that dignity was not something rooms could permanently take from her, and the man who had decided, without announcement, that some things were simply not permitted. Outside, the city moved through its morning as though nothing had changed. But something had. and it would not be undone. If this story moved something inside you, stop for just a moment and ask yourself this. Have you ever walked into a room and felt invisible? Have you ever been judged not by who you are, but by how you looked, where you came from, or what someone decided you were worth in 3 seconds? And have you ever had someone completely unexpected, see you, truly see you, when you had already stopped asking to be seen? Because that is what happened here. Not a grand gesture, not a public speech, just a man who decided, quietly and completely, that some things are simply not permitted. Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the kind of silence that changes everything, make sure you're subscribed to the channel.